Hey guys, it's Lotus and welcome back to another video. Today, we're going to continue on with our read-along of Urha. Let's jump right into it. Chapter 120, Shizun Goes into Seclusion. The first light of dawn painted red the clouds in the sky. It was still early, but there was already a large gathering of disciples outside the Red Lotus Pavilion, dressed in white mourning robes and lining the sides of the pathway with heads lowered and eyes downcast. Dong, dong, dong. The sound of the morning bell came from the heaven-piercing tower, and several people could be seen walking slowly in the distance, carrying the coffin. Xue Zhengyang and Tanlang Elder walked in front, followed by Moran and Xuemeng, with Shimei and a monk dressed in worn robes walking on either side. They approached slowly through the morning fog, treading along the dew-slick bluestone path. The monk was holding a lantern. It was already light out, but the lantern's glow was no less brilliant, its golden radiance dazzling like summer blossoms. The gathering of disciples lowered their heads solemnly, barely even daring to breathe. They had already heard that Master Huaizui of Wubei Temple had hastened over for the sake of Yu Heng Elder, so this unassuming monk was probably him. The reverence that the juniors held toward such a person of legend far outweighed their curiosity, and none dared to take a good look as he made his way up the long mountain path. And so, with the tapping sounds of a monk stick and the glimpse of a pair of hemp-woven monk shoes from downcast eyes, the great master passed by with lightly billowing robes as the disciples stood reverently in his wake. The coffin was carried steadily the whole way. It was not a burial, but a revival, and so no one wept. Arriving at the Red Lotus Pavilion, Huaizui looked around before saying, "Next to the Lotus Pond will do. There's an abundance of spiritual energy there, suitable for spells." "Alrighty, you heard the great master!" Xue Zhengyang led the others to go set the black ice coffin down by the Lotus Pond. "Just let me know if the great master needs anything else. Saving Yu Heng is the same as saving half my life. I'll do anything I can to help." "Many thanks for Xue Zhangmen's kindness," Huaizui said. "This humble monk has no needs at the moment, but will be sure to inform Zhangmen if any should arise in the future." "Sure, please do feel free." Huaizui put his palms together and bowed respectfully towards Xue Zhengyang with a smile, then turned to address the others present. "This incompetent monk will need 5 years to return Elder Chu's soul. In order to prevent disturbances, Red Lotus Pavilion will be closed to visitors from today until Elder Chu's revival in 5 years. Xuemeng had already been told about that before, but having Huaizui confirm once again that it was going to take 5 years for Shizun to wake up, the rims of his eyes still grew red as he silently lowered his head. "If anyone wishes to say any parting words to Elder Chu, then please do so now. After today, it'll be 1,000 some days until you can meet again." So they went, one by one. Xue Zhengyang and the elders went first, taking turns to stand solemnly before the coffin and say their farewells. Xue Zhengyang said, "Let us meet again soon." Tanlang said, "Wake up soon." Xuanji said, "Hope everything goes well." Lu Sun said with a sigh, "I kind of envy you, frozen in time for 5 years like this and not having to look any older." The other elders also each said their piece, some longer and some shorter, and it was Xuemeng's turn before long. Xuemeng had every intention to hold it together, but his emotions had always gotten the better of him, and this too was no exception, as he started crying next to Chuanning's coffin. He choked out between sobs while vigorously wiping away his tears. "Shizun, I'll work hard to train myself, even if you're not here. I definitely won't embarrass you at the upcoming Spiritual Mountain competition. I'll tell you all about my high ranking when you wake up. My Shizun doesn't have losers as his disciples after all." Xue Zhengyang walked over and clapped him on the shoulder. Xuemeng didn't cling to his father like he usually did, but turned away with a sniffle instead. He didn't want to look like a useless, spoiled child that needed his father for everything in front of his Shizun. Next was Shimei. Shimei's eyes were wet as well. He didn't say anything, only looked at Chuaning for a while with his head lowered, before quietly retreating to the side. After he left, a light pink haitang blossom was placed gently into the coffin. The hand that placed it, although still somewhat youthful-looking, was already long and slender. Moran stood by the coffin. A breeze danced past the surface of the water, carrying the soft, sweet fragrance of the lotus flowers. The breeze tousled his fringe, but when he lifted his hand, it was to brush Chuaning's face. Moran pressed his lips together, looking like he had a lot that he wanted to say, but in the end, all he said was a soft, slightly hoarse, "I'll wait for you." Wait for you for what? He didn't say. He felt like he probably wanted to say, "I'll wait for you to wake up," but those words seemed insufficient somehow. It felt like there was no way to express the feelings that were crowded to bursting in his chest, as if there was a pool of scalding hot lava in his heart. Surging about madly and unable to find a way out, the force of the impact making him feel pained and panicked. It felt like the impact would one day rip right through his heart, and then the lava would spill out uncontrollably, and the raging flow would melt him into ash. But right now, he still wasn't sure what that burning feeling was, so he only said, "I'll wait for you." The Red Lotus Pavilion was closed off. An enormous barrier came down like a gate separating life from death, denying anyone entry. Henceforth, for the next 5 years, none would be privy to the fragrance of lotus blossoms in the summer, nor the quiet solitude of snow in the winter within the pavilion. Bamboo leaves rustled in the wind and haitang blossoms drifted slowly down. From outside the Red Lotus Pavilion all the way to the main gate, disciples knelt down on the ground, with Moran, Xuemeng, and Shumei at the head of this vast river. Shui Zhengyong announced in a booming voice that rang through the skies and forests, "Wishing Yu Heng Elder well in his seclusion." The disciples repeated solemnly with their heads down, "Wishing Yu Heng Elder well in his seclusion." Thousands of voices rose, out of sync, rumbling forth from the cloud-shrouded Shizun Peak and startling the birds into flight all around, bird calls filling the skies as they circled the treetops, not daring to land. The massive voices rose heavensward, rumbling like thunder through streaming clouds. "Wishing Shizun well in his seclusion," Moran said in a soft voice, then bowed down to the ground for a long time. 5 years of waiting. After Yu Heng went into seclusion, his 3 disciples, unwilling to even temporarily take other elders as teachers, each worked hard to train and cultivate on their own. For reasons of aptitude, cultivation path, and other such, Shumei and Xuemeng stayed at the peak, while Moran chose to travel. Moran really did learn better through experience, but the other reason he made this choice was because so many things had turned out differently in this reborn life. Aside from what had happened with Chuaning, the fake Gochen worried him a great deal. He suspected that the person behind everything might also have been reborn. After all, that person could already be said to be quite proficient in Zhenlong chess formation, but in the previous lifetime, even up until he took his own life, there had been no one else in the world capable of utilizing this forbidden technique to this extent. He had no talent for ferreting out hidden identities, but ever since the battle at Butterfly Town, the entire cultivation world had kept its eyes peeled, just waiting for that person to slip up and expose themselves, so he didn't really need to get involved in this matter. Moran knew he wasn't exactly smart, that his strength lay in his abundance of spiritual energy and natural aptitude for cultivation. Since another confrontation in the future was inevitable, the best thing he could do right now was to get himself back up to his pre-birth battle prowess as soon as possible. Last life, he had been a destroyer. This life, he wanted to be a protector. Not long after Chuaning had gone into seclusion, Moran stood before the main gate of Shizun Peak, carrying a traveling bag just about to set off on his journey. Only a few people came to see him off: Shui Zhengyong, Madame Wang, and Shumei. Shui Zhengyong clapped him on the shoulder and said, a little awkwardly, "Meng won't be coming. He said..." Moran chuckled. "He said he's too busy training in the forest to come see me off, didn't he?" ... Feeling even more awkward, Shui Zhengyong couldn't help chiding, "That thoughtless brat!" Moran said with a smile, "He's got his heart set on first place at the Spiritual Mountain competition. It's only natural that he'll be diligent about training. I'll leave it to him to earn glory in Shizun's name." Shui Zhengyong looked at Moran hesitantly, then said, "The Spiritual Mountain competition is the 4th most tournament in Orthodox cultivation. I'm sure Rynn will grow and learn much in his travels, but the competition probably won't allow the kind of assorted admixed techniques you're going to end up learning. It'd be a pity if you ended up missing out because of that." Moran replied, "My cousin's got it covered." "Don't you want to make a name for yourself?" Moran actually burst out laughing at that. Make a name for himself? He had missed out on the spiritual mountain competition in the last lifetime because he had committed some wrong and had been punished by confinement at the time, and he had always felt resentment about that. But that same thing seemed to him such a non-issue now. What did it even matter? He was someone who had already been through so much death and partings, awash in an endless tidal flood of trials and tribulations, who had gone from unresigned to expectant, from expectant to resentful, from resentful to relieved, from relieved to remorseful. Here and now, what Maran wanted was no longer beauties and fine wine, or the worship of the masses, much less things like revenge and the adrenaline rush of killing and raising. He had already seen for himself the boundless opulence and luxuries at the apex of the world, and he had already grown tired of it all. He didn't want to go back there. It was cold, and there was no one by his side. After all, he had once been Emperor Taxianjun, had stood upon the mightiest mountain with the world in the palm of his hand, had seen all there was to see. Of course he wouldn't care about some trifling thing like the measly applause and couple of cheers at the spiritual mountain competition. As for the ranking, whoever wanted it could have it. "I'd rather do other things," Maran said with a smile. "Xuemeng is a young master, and young masters have their way of living, but I'm just a hooligan, and hooligans have their own hooligan lives." Madame Wang couldn't help the pity in her voice as she said, "Silly child, what are you saying? You're the same as Meng. What young master and hooligan?" Maran laughed, but it was a little pained. One was born into the lap of luxury, while the other was low and petty by birth. Even though he had been immensely fortunate to end up here at Sishang Peak, he had still spent the first over 10 years of his life in a murky haze, so how could they possibly be the same? But seeing the gentle, concerned look on Madame Wang's face, he couldn't really say any of that, so he only nodded and said, "Auntie is right, I misspoke." Madame Wang shook her head with a smile and handed him a small Qiankun pouch with pollia flowers sewn on it. "You'll have to look after yourself while you travel. Take this, it's filled with medicines for injuries. I made them myself, so they're more effective than the kind you can buy in stores. Make sure not to lose it." Maran said gratefully, "Thanks a lot, Auntie." Shimei said, "I don't really have anything to give you besides this jade pendant. Here, wear it. It keeps your spiritual core warm." Taking it in hand, Maran noted that the white jade was creamy smooth and warm to the touch, an exceedingly rare high-grade item. He hurriedly tucked the jade pendant back into Shimei's hand, saying, "I can't accept this, it's far too valuable. And besides, my spiritual core is already fire elemental to start with. If it gets warmed any further, I might have a chi deviation." Shimei laughed. "Don't be silly, what chi deviation?" "Anyway, I'm not taking it," Maran maintained. "You have a weak constitution, it'll do you more good than it would me." "But I had someone get it from the Xuanyuan Pavilion auction just for you." Maran felt all warm at his sides. All warm at his words, but more than that, felt his heart ache for him. "Then it must have been really expensive. This jade pendant really won't do much for me, but it'd be great for you. Shimei, I appreciate the thought, but please keep it for yourself, and remember to wear it so as to nourish your spiritual energy." Oh, Maran turned down a gift directly from Shimei. I see that his emotions and feelings are slowly starting to change. In the past, he would never have said no to Shimei, right? But all he has on his mind right now is getting stronger so that he can make Shizun proud when he comes out of seclusion. Shimei still wanted to say something, but Maran had already uncoiled the thin cord and put the jade pendant around his neck. "Looks good," he said with a smile, then lifted a hand to pat Shimei on the shoulder. "Looks much better on you than it would on me. I'm such a rough and tumble kind of person. I'd probably break it in 2 days' time." Raner is right. The jade pendant can be worn by anyone, but it's best for people with water elemental spiritual cores. Mei just keep it. Now that even Madame Wang had spoken up, of course Shimei would listen to her. He nodded and said to Maran, "Then take care of yourself." "Don't worry, I'll write to you often." Shimei was a bit sad at having to say goodbye soon, but he couldn't help laughing at that. "Only Shizun can read your chicken scratch handwriting, you know." Maran wasn't sure what it was that he felt at the mention of Chuaning. The hatred that used to gnaw at his very bones had dissipated, but the remorse was still there, like a wound scabbing over, a dull, itchy ache in his heart. And so, with this feeling in his chest, Moran set off down the mountain by himself. 1, 2, 3. He counted in his head as he walked, head lowered. 101, 102, 103. Arriving at the foot of the mountain, he couldn't help looking back towards Shizun Peak, high up and shrouded amongst the clouds, with no end to be seen to the long flight of stone steps. He murmured, 3,799. He had counted as he walked. It was the number of steps up to the main gate, the number of steps that Chuaning had climbed that day, carrying him on his back. He was sure that, for as long as he lived, he would never forget what Chuaning's hands had been like, cold as ice, chaffed raw and bloody. Truth of the matter was, whether a person did good or committed evil was rarely ever due to their inherent nature. Each person was like a plot of farmland. Some were lucky, their fields sprinkled with seeds of grain, bearing an abundant harvest come autumn, paddies wafting with the soft fragrance of rice and fields of wheat dancing in the wind like waves, and everything would be good and praiseworthy. But some were not so lucky. Their fields were planted with the seeds of poppy flowers, and the spring breeze brought only the sin of intoxicated dissipation and euphoric decadence, filling the skies and covering the lands with that vile, bloody red and gold. The people abhorred it, cursed it, feared it, even as they indulged in its blissful stupor, rotted away in its filthy stench. And, in the end, the righteous and upstanding would gather together, set the field on fire, and as the twisting smoke rose into the sky, they would say he was a breeding ground of sin, that he was a demonic fiend, that he was vicious and ruthless, that he had no conscience, that he deserved it. He convulsed in the blaze, crying out in pain as the poppy flowers shriveled up and turned into mud, the air choked with the smell of burning. But he had once been a plot of good farmland too, had once wanted nothing more than water and sunlight too. Just whom was it who had planted that first seed of darkness, sowed the disaster that grew out of control? The plot of land, once temperate and splendid, went up in flames and turned into dust, laid fallow. He was a plot of unwanted, abandoned land. He never thought that someone would come into his life and plow these fields again, give him another chance. Chuaning. It would be 5 years before he could see him again. Today was day 1. He suddenly found himself already missing Chuaning's face, his stern, angry, gentle, serious, steadfast face. Moran slowly closed his eyes. He thought back to his lives, past and present, so many bygone happenings scattering like snow in the wind. He slowly realized that the Heavenly Rift incident had in fact been the biggest crossroads of his life. In his last life, he had loved someone dearly. Later, that person had given up his life, and he'd ended up in hell. In this life, there was someone else who loved and protected him. Later, that person had given up his life and brought him back to the world of the living. End of chapter 120. So, to recap, they hold a big procession, a big ceremony for everyone at Shizun Peak to pay their respects to Chuaning, and then Huaizui takes Chuaning's body and closes up Red Lotus Pavilion to work on helping merge the souls back and bring Shizun back to life. So that will take 5 years, and everyone is still in mourning, and you know, they're just really solemn and sad and melancholic, but no one's crying because Shizun will be coming back in 5 years. And so Xuemeng decides to train harder, and he's going to do really well to go to the spiritual mountain competition. He wants to make Shizun proud. Shimei is also training himself. They don't take any new masters while Shizun is in seclusion. And Moran decides to go on a journey. He decides that he won't stay at Shizun Peak for the 5 years that Shizun is away in seclusion. He's going to wander the world and maybe go on a spiritual self-awakening journey. And he hopes that when he comes back, he can make Shizun proud and be someone that is deserving of being Chuaning's disciple. So let's see. Let's keep going. Are we going to get to see what he's been doing during these 5 years? Okay. Chapter 101. Shizun is the real Zhongshi. On the 8th day after Moran left, Shui Zhengyang received the first letter from him. Messy scrawls on line stationery that tried their best to be neat, but to no avail. I hope this letter finds Uncle well. I'm at Blossom Crossing today, and everything is going well. There was an evil spirit here a couple of days ago, but luckily no one was hurt. I've already taken care of the pesky water spirit, so the fairies are able to come and go safely again. The boatswain paid me 500 in silver notes, attached here with the letter. Please send Auntie and Shizun my regards. The 120th day, the 120th day, and the 20th, wait. The 120th day and the 22nd letter. I hope this letter finds Uncle well. I recently chanced across a high-quality spiritual stone that could be embedded into Shui Meng's long-chung blade to make it a peerless weapon. It still wouldn't be a holy weapon, but it should make for a fine weapon regardless. Please send Auntie and Shizun my regards. The 130th day and the 24th letter. I hope this letter finds Uncle well. Lately, I've been cultivating at Snow Valley. It's always cold here, and there are all kinds of unusual flora, of which the frost lotus is the rarest. I didn't have the skills to get past the 1000th year 8 monster guarding the flower field at first, but I've made good progress in recent days and managed to pick a dozen or so, which I've attached with the letter. Please send Auntie and Shizun my regards. The letters often came attached with some small playthings, medicinal herbs, or spiritual stones. Aside from writing to Shui Jianyang, Moran also wrote privately to Shimei. The contents of these letters were mostly just about the places he went and the things he saw, asking how he was and reminding him to dress warmly and other such trivial things. The brushstrokes on paper were a mess full of mistakes at first, but as time went on, although the handwriting wasn't exactly good-looking, it did gradually straighten into something neat and mature, with fewer and fewer errors. A year went by in the blink of an eye. One day, as Shui Jianyang was savoring the fresh spring tea, another letter from Moran came. He read the letter with a smile before passing it to Madame Wang, whose lips curled into a smile as well as she read. His handwriting has certainly gotten better.
Doesn't it look like just a certain someone's?
Whose? Shui Jianyang blew on his tea leaves, then retrieved a copy of Mariram of Ancient Barriers from his desk.
Compare it with Yu Heng's writing. 7 parts alike,
Madame Wang looked through the scroll and said with surprise, It really is.
He took Yu Heng as teacher when he first came to Sishong Peak, after all. Yu Heng had him read on his own at first, but he barely even knew any of the characters. So then Yu Heng spent quite some days teaching him, starting with his name, then simple things, and then more complex things.
Shui Jianyang shook his head.
He never did take it seriously back then, always putting down some chicken scratch just to get it over with. But look at him now, finally learning to write decently.
Madame Wang said with a smile, Going out to see the world is doing him wonders. He seems much more mature now. Shui Jianyang was smiling as well as he said,
Wonder what he's gonna be like after the 5 years of traveling around. How old will he be then? 22?
22. Shui Jianyang sighed with a hint of regret.
I thought Yu Heng would be able to watch them grow into their 20s, but the heavens had their own plans.
The heavens had their own plans, that's what Moran thought too. He traveled all over the place, from the misty rains of Jiangnan to the south to the Sangguan Pass of Saibei, to the north, sat by the Tulao River and chugged rice wine in the summer, huddled by the campfire and listened to a tune on the Qiang flute in the winter. Last lifetime, after declaring himself emperor, he had owned all the lands under the skies, yet never once took the time to go travel them, to go see the lanterns and fishing boats of the east, or the underground aqueducts of the west, never bothered to notice the dark, toughened, and cracked soles of a porter's feet who carried load-laden poles across cobblestone roads, never stopped to listen to the singing of the young trainees in the opera troupe, their voices pitched like ripping silk, rising into the skies. Such brilliant splendor, blooms flourishing abound against a backdrop desolate of walls ruined and I should say that again. Such brilliant splendor, blooms flourishing abound against a backdrop desolate of walls ruined and decrepit. He wasn't Ta Xianjun anymore, wouldn't ever be Ta Xianjun again in this life. He was... Da Gugu, came the tender voice of a child from the bookstore. Da Gugu, can you save this birdie? Its wing is broken. I don't know what to do.
Little Xianjun.
Oh, Little Xianjun, came the old raspy voice of Shijiu Village's village head. Thank you. All of us here are too old to do anything about evil spirits. If not for you, we would have had to abandon our homes and go elsewhere. This old one will never forget Xianjun's kindness for as long as he lives. Kind person, came the trembling voice of a beggar woman on the street. Kind person, my child and I haven't had a real meal for days. Please, won't you be so kind? Moran closed his eyes and opened them again. because there was someone calling for him.
Mo Zhongshi.
Stunned by the form of address, he looked up toward the suntanned bloke calling for him and said with helpless resignation,
I'm no Zhongshi. That's my Shizun. Please don't call me that anymore.
The bloke scratched his head bashfully.
Sorry about that. I know you don't like it. It's just a force of habit because everyone in the village calls you that.
Moran had been staying in a small village near the border of the lower cultivation realm lately. The village was often troubled by snow ghosts, owing to the snowy mountain that towered some kilometers outside. They were only minor nuisances with little spiritual power, and one of Shizun's Holy Night Guardians would have more than sufficed to take care of them. But the village was far too remote for the use of Holy Night Guardians to have spread this far. And so, with no other choice, Moran could only try to make one himself, following Shizun's diagrams. He'd failed many times before finally managing to make a Holy Night Guardian. It wasn't as good-looking as Shizun's, or as nimble, but the creaking wooden golem was serviceable. The people of the backwater village, delighted with this curious new thing, had started calling him Mo Zhongshi. Moran felt nothing but awkwardness at this turn of events. But the more awkward thing was yet to come. One particular evening, with half the sky dyed red by the setting sun, he was walking along a busy alleyway by an apricot grove, on his way back from lectures at an academy on Taishan Mountain, when he suddenly heard someone calling.
Chu Zhongshi!
Moran's head whipped around at the name immediately and without thinking, and then he almost wanted to laugh at himself as his brain caught up. There were plenty of cultivators out there with the surname Chu. He really was getting ahead of himself to think that his Shizun has somehow woken up already. Of course not. He shook his head with a smile and was just about to turn back around when the call came again.
Chu Zhongshi! ...
Holding his pile of books, Moran squinted into the crowd. There was someone waving at him, but the person was too far for him to see his face. He could only vaguely see the clothing and build. It was a young man dressed in blue cultivator garb, with a bow on his back and a wolf by his side. The person walked over briskly, and the both of them were caught by surprise when they were close enough to see the other's face.
You're...
Moran. He reacted before the other did with a simple nod of his head, since his hands were occupied with the books, and his gaze paused curiously on the young man's face for a moment.
Fancy meeting Nangong Gongzi here?
As it turned out, the one calling him Chu Zhongshi was none other than the Gongzi of Rufeng sect, Nan Gongzi. This guy had died too early in the past life for Moran to have met him back then, but Chuaning was different. Chuaning used to be a guest instructor at Rufeng sect, so it was only natural that Nan Gongzi knew him well. As Moran looked him over, the quiver in Nan Gongzi's hand caught his eyes. It was an old quiver made of cloth, so worn that the camellias embroidered on it had faded in color, their once vibrant petals yellowed by time, as if even embroidered flowers couldn't escape the fate of wilting away. Nan Gongzi was neat and well-dressed, save for the threadbare, visibly patched quiver. Moran could tell that the quiver was precious to him. After all, didn't everyone have a couple of sentimental objects? Even the most bodacious person was sure to have memories they held dear. No one was heartless, however they might appear. Nothing was that simple. Nan Gongzi's brows furrowed. Moran, I remember now. Chu Zhongshi's disciple? That being the case, Nan Gongzi's attitude grew somewhat milder, saying, my bad, your clothing and silhouette looked rather like the Zhongshis from a distance, so I thought he had come out of seclusion ahead of time without me knowing. Moran pulled his gaze away from the quiver, tactfully not prying as he replied without missing a beat.
Hearing your yelling earlier, I also thought Shizun had come out of seclusion ahead of time without me knowing.
Nan Gongzi burst out laughing, maybe because he was highborn, but even when gawking so, his handsome features still managed to retain a measure of arrogance, and this arrogance of his was different from Xuemeng's. Xuemeng's arrogance was a conceited pride born of skill and talent, while Nan Gongzi's was a touch more belligerent, a headstrong, fiery kind of arrogance. But he was born in the lap of luxury, and so the belligerence only made him seem mild and audacious rather than frightening. Moran couldn't help thinking to himself that Nan Gongzi really was a spirited stallion. He was still musing when he heard Nan Gongzi say, I absolutely retched when Chu Zhongshi lost his life during the Heavenly Rift. Thankfully, he was able to be revived under the Great Master's guidance. I'll definitely go pay a visit to Sishong Peak once he wakes up.
We'll be looking forward to it.
Nan Gongzi waved his hand nonchalantly, and then, noting the books in Moran's hands, asked curiously, "What's Mo Xiong up to?" "Studying." Nangongsi thought that surely he'd be studying some complicated historic scrolls, only to find out on second glance that it was only simple classics like The Untrammeled Traveler and Classic of Rites. He was dumbfounded for a second before saying, These are all fundamental readings, books I've learned by heart since I was little. What are you doing reading these?" Moran's gaze was even and unashamed as he replied, "When I was little, I didn't even know how to write my own name." Nangongsi felt a little awkward. You studying at the academy?" "Yeah, I was collecting spiritual stones for cultivational purposes on Taishan Mountain a little while back, and I happened to see that classes were starting at Apricot Grove Academy. I have some free time right now, so I've been going to the lectures." Nangongsi nodded, and seeing that it was getting late, said, "Say, Mo Xiong hasn't had dinner yet, right? Since you're here in Rufeng Sect's province and Chu Zhongshi's disciple to boot, let me be a proper host. I'm actually on my way to a nearby restaurant to meet up with a companion right now. So how about it? Join us for a drink?" Moran didn't have any plans anyway, so he said, "I'd be honored." "We're headed to Wu Yu Pavilion then, one of Lin Yi's most famous restaurants. They make the best braised pork intestine out there. You ever heard of them?" Nangongsi chatted as they walked. "Of course I have," Moran grinned. "They're one of the Upper Cultivation Realm's top restaurants. You sure know how to pick the place, Nangongongsi." "I didn't pick the place." "Oh, who did then?" "My companion did," Nangongsi replied. Having already lived through one lifetime, Moran knew some things about the complicated relations in Rufeng Sect. He thought with surprise, though he didn't say it aloud. Was Ye Wangxi here as well? He followed Nangongsi up the stairs, pushing aside the pearl curtain to step into the private booth of the restaurant, and nearly choked when he saw whom it was waiting inside. It was Song Chu Tong, dressed in light silks and standing by the window, gazing at the peach blossoms outside. She turned around at the sound of them entering, the golden adornments that dangled by her temples swaying gently and catching the light, making her skin seem all the more fairer and her lips all the more redder, beautiful beyond words. Moran's foot, mid-step into the room, subconsciously pulled back. He wondered if it was too late to tell Nangongsi that he didn't like Shandong cuisine and especially disliked braised pork intestine. Oh, okay, end of chapter 121. Okay, so to recap, Moran goes on his journey and he writes back letters quite often to Shizun Peak, and he always sends back little trinkets, like he found this nice little jade stone for Shui Monk's sword. He found some nice flowers and herbs to give to Madame Wang, and he's always sending back things. He also writes private letters to Shimei. So he still does have Shimei. He still has some affection for Shimei, but I don't know if it's still romantic anymore. Because again, like in the last chapter, he turned down the pendant that Shimei wanted to give him. But yeah, he's writing back letters really often, and he's going around and helping other people in the lower cultivation realm. He's helping out the villagers, especially the ones that live isolated from the rest of society. He's improved his writing. He writes more like Chua Ning now. His handwriting, his penmanship has gotten quite better. He also seems to be dressing like Chua Ning, whether it be consciously or subconsciously. He built a golem using Chua Ning's instructions, and you know, he's just doing his best to help the people in need. No matter whoever the person is, if they ask him for help, he will help because he believes that's what Shizun would do. And Moran wants to be the best that he can be for Shizun. And so one day he is attending some classes because he has some time, and he bumps into Nangongsi. So Nangongsi is back, but not only is he back, but Song Chu Tong is back as well. I wonder what's gonna happen here, because Moran is like, I really do not want to see you in this lifetime again. So I wonder if maybe the fake Go-Chen will be coming back soon. Are we gonna see Ye Wangxi? Because we know that Ye Wangxi normally hangs around Nangongsi. Also, is Nangongsi and Song Chu Tong now in a relationship? Because I feel really bad for Ye Wangxi if that is the case. But yeah, so right now Shizun is still in seclusion. Master Huaizui is doing his best to help bring Shizun back, and Moran is also doing his best to cultivate himself and become more worldly and more educated and more strong and more empathetic, and he's just becoming a better person. We are watching the progression of Moran 2.0. So I can't wait for Shizun to meet this new Moran. He'll be taller and more handsome and more eloquent, and I bet Shizun will just be like in awe of who this person is when he wakes up. He'll be like, what happened to my disciple? Who are you? What happened to the dumb husky that was my disciple? But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed today's read-along, and I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye!